The gilt-edged mirror did not flatter. It was an honest, unforgiving sort of glass, and it showed Felicity Cole a truth she had been attempting to avoid for the last hour. It showed her the fine, tight line of her father's mouth as he stood behind her, his reflection hovering over her shoulder like a bailiff of the soul. "He is the Duke of Velmore," her father said again, the name a heavy, polished stone in the quiet room. "It is an honor beyond anything you might have hoped for." Felicity's hands, folded in the lap of her plain grey muslin dress, did not move. Her gaze remained on the mirror, on the double image of their shared captivity. His, in a prison of debt and desperation. Hers, in the gilded cage he was currently constructing for her. The cruelty was not in his words. The words themselves were proper, even celebratory. The cruelty was in the space between them. It was in the utter absence of any question. Not, "Would you like to marry him?" Not, "What do you think, my dear?" It was a statement of fact. A deed signed and delivered. "You are sold. This is the price." "An honor," she repeated, her voice a low and steady thing. It was a voice she had cultivated over years of her father's fluctuating fortunes and her mother's long illness. A voice that promised no trouble, that absorbed shock without shattering. "It saves us, Felicity," he said, and for the first time, a crack appeared in his composure. He moved from behind her, beginning to pace the worn Aubusson carpet. The threadbare patches mapped his anxieties. "It saves this house. It saves my name. Do you have any idea what it is to be pursued? To hear a knock and fear it is not a neighbor, but a writ?" She did. She knew intimately. She knew by the way he flinched at the sound of carriage wheels on the gravel drive. She knew by the pained look in the housekeeper's eyes when she had to say again that the butcher would not extend their credit. She knew the precise weight of shame, and he was now asking her to carry it all. "His Grace requires a wife," her father continued, his back to her. He stopped before the window, looking out at the overgrown lawns. "A duchess. He is the last of his line. His brother? There was a tragedy. The Duke has need of a respectable, well-bred young woman. Quiet. Uncomplicated. Uncomplicated. A thing to be installed, like a new set of curtains. Our man of business, Mr. Davies, has been in correspondence with the Duke's own solicitor. The arrangements are delicate, but they are made. The debts will be cleared upon the solemnization of the marriage." He finally turned to face her. His eyes were pleading, but his jaw was set. It was a terrible combination. It was the face of a man who knew he was doing wrong and was determined to do it anyway. "You will go to London next week. You will be formally introduced. You will be agreeable, Felicity." It was not a request. It was an instruction on how to behave at one's own auction. She did not cry. She had learned a long time ago that tears were exactly what he expected. They were a currency he knew how to manage, to soothe, to ultimately ignore. Silence, however, was a fortress he could not breach. She stood, her reflection rising to meet her in the old mirror. "When do I leave?" she asked. Relief washed over his face, so potent it was nearly indecent. He had his compliance. The transaction was secure. "Tuesday," he said, his voice suddenly brisk. "You will need a new dress, something suitable for meeting a duke." Felicity looked down at her grey muslin. It was clean. It was mended. It was all she had that was not patched. "This will be suitable enough," she said, because it did not matter what she wore. The goods had already been sold. The day before she was to leave for London, A storm rolled in from the west, a great bruised belly of cloud that broke over the rolling hills of their small corner of Hertfordshire. Felicity had always loved the rain. It washed the world clean. It was the one thing that fell upon the grandest estate and the most humble cottage with equal indifference. She pulled on her sturdiest boots and a heavy cloak, ignoring the housekeeper's worried clucking. She needed to walk. She needed to feel the cold, wet air on her face and the solid earth beneath her feet one last time before she was handed over to a life of polished floors and suffocating etiquette. She walked far, her mind a tumult of unspoken protests and resigned prayers. She walked until the familiar paths gave way to a little-used track that cut across the low-lying fields toward the old woods. The rain came down in earnest now, a relentless drumming on the hood of her cloak. The track turned to a slick, sucking mire of mud. It was foolish to be out here, she knew. It was reckless, and it felt like the only sane thing she had done all week. It was as she rounded a bend, where the track dipped into a hollow, that she saw it, a dark, handsome, travelling carriage, slewed at a desperate angle, one of its great rear wheels sunk to the axle in the churning mud. A single, fine-boned horse stood patiently in the traces, its head bowed against the downpour. And beside the wheel, covered in mud from his boots to the collar of his fine wool coat, was a man. He was tall, and from the set of his broad shoulders, powerful. He had abandoned his hat, and his dark hair was plastered to his forehead. He was engaged in a furious, futile battle with the wheel, his shoulder set against it, trying to heave the entire carriage from the mud's embrace by sheer force of will. He cursed, a low, frustrated sound that the wind snatched away. Felicity hesitated for only a moment. Her father's voice echoed in her head. A young lady does not accost strange gentlemen on lonely roads. But her own pragmatism answered, "That is not a strange gentleman. That is a man who needs help." She drew closer, her boots making soft, squelching sounds. "You will not move it that way," she said, her voice clear and carrying over the rain. He froze, then straightened up slowly, turning to face her. He looked less like a gentleman, and more like some primal creature of the earth, splattered with its essence. He was older than she had first thought, perhaps a little over 30. His face was all sharp angles and aristocratic lines, now smeared with mud and streaked with rain. But it was his eyes that caught her. They were grey, the colour of the storm-tossed sky, and filled with a startling combination of fury, frustration, and a deep, abiding sadness that seemed entirely separate from his current predicament. "And you are an expert in the extraction of carriages, are you?" he asked, his voice a low growl of sarcasm. His accent was that of the highest echelons of the ton, clipped and precise, even when laced with irritation. Felicity was not deterred. She had been dealing with her father's tempers for years. This was nothing. "I am an expert in this particular mud," she corrected him calmly. "You are trying to lift. You need to lever, and you are pushing against the slope of the ditch." She pointed. "You are only driving it deeper." He stared at her. 1 second. 2 seconds. The rain dripped from the end of his nose. She expected him to dismiss her, to tell her to be on her way. Instead, something shifted in his expression. The fury receded, replaced by a weary curiosity. "Very well, Miss Expert in the mud," he said, with a hint of a wry twist to his mouth. "What do you propose?" "There is a fallen fence post about 100 yards back," she said, her mind already working. It is old oak. It will be strong enough. We will need to dig out from under the axle and use the post as a lever, with that large stone as a fulcrum. She pointed to a rock half buried in the verge. Your horse can pull once the weight is shifted. It cannot pull the dead weight of the carriage and the mud. He did not argue. He simply gave a short, sharp nod, as if receiving a report from a trusted subordinate. Show me. And so began the most absurd hour of Felicity's life. She led him back to the fence post, which he wrenched from the ground with an impressive display of strength. Together, they dragged it back to the mired carriage. Under her direction, he used his hands to scoop away the clinging, clay-like mud from beneath the axle, while she found smaller stones to jam behind the other wheels to stop them from sliding further. They worked in a strange, silent communion. The rain was their chaperone, the wind their conversation. She was aware of him, of his size and strength, of the clean, masculine scent of rain-soaked wool and damp earth. He moved with a surprising grace for a man of his station, without complaint, his earlier frustration channeled into focused effort. He glanced at her once, a cloak soaked through, her hair escaping its pins and sticking to her cheeks. She was kneeling in the wet grass, positioning the fulcrum stone, her hands as muddy as his own. He saw the concentration on her face, the complete lack of coquetry or feminine helplessness. She was not performing for him. She was simply solving the problem. Now, she said, breathing a little heavily. Jam the end of the post under the axle. When I give the word, put all your weight on the other end. I will guide the horse. He did as he was told. He positioned the heavy oak post. Felicity moved to the horse's head, stroking its wet neck, murmuring to it. The poor creature was tired and spooked. Ready? She called. He grunted in affirmation. Now. He threw his entire weight onto the end of the long post. There was a great groaning sound, a sucking slorp of resistance, and the great wheel lifted, inch by agonizing inch, from the mud. At the same moment, Felicity urged the horse forward. Walk on, boy. Hup. The horse, feeling the shift in weight, strained in its traces. The carriage shuddered, creaked, and then, with a final, violent lurch, it rolled forward onto solid ground. It was done. Felicity stood, patting the horse's neck, her heart thumping with exertion. The man leaned against the side of the carriage, breathing heavily, mud clinging to him like a second skin. He looked at the liberated wheel, then at her. A slow, genuine smile spread across his face, transforming it completely. The sadness in his eyes was still there, but it was joined by something else. Astonishment, and a grudging admiration. I'll be damned, he said, his voice softer now. Miss Expert in the Mud. Felicity felt a blush rise to her cheeks, a warmth that had nothing to do with the cold. I am glad I could be of assistance, sir, she said, suddenly formal. Assistance? He let out a short laugh. My dear woman, you have been my salvation. I would have been here until the spring thaw. He pushed himself off the carriage and strode toward her, extending a muddy hand, then thinking better of it and letting it drop. I am profoundly in your debt. It is nothing, she said quickly. Anyone would have done the same. No, he said, and his gaze was suddenly intense. I assure you, they would not have. He looked her over properly then. You are soaked through, and you live nearby. The coal estate is just over that rise, she said, gesturing vaguely. Coal? he repeated, the name tasting strange on his lips. My man has gone ahead to the village to fetch a blacksmith for what I thought was a broken axle. It appears it is merely a deep pothole. He looked at his ruined clothes and sighed. I must look a fright. You look like a man who has had a difficult afternoon, Felicity replied, a small smile touching her own lips. It felt unfamiliar. Allow me to at least see you home, he offered. No, thank you. I prefer the walk, and I believe you have need of that blacksmith all the same. Your wheel may be free, but it looks to have taken a beating. He had the grace to look chagrined. Of course, you're right. He hesitated, as if unsure of the protocol for this bizarre situation. I am Ben, he said finally. Just Ben? It was so clearly not his full name, but she appreciated the gesture. Felicity, she replied. Felicity, he repeated, and the sound of her name in his low, rich voice sent a strange shiver through her. Well, Felicity, thank you. He made a small, aborted bow. She gave a little curtsy. It was a parody of drawing-room manners, performed on a muddy track in the pouring rain. And it was the most real social interaction she had experienced in years. She turned and walked away, not looking back. But she could feel his eyes on her, all the way up the rise. When she reached the top, she risked a glance. He was still standing there, a tall, dark, mud-spattered figure beside his carriage, watching her. A stranger, a secret, a moment of unexpected grace before the long, dry transaction of her future began. We'll take a very short break. If you don't want to miss new stories, please subscribe to the channel. London was a symphony of noise and smoke, a stark contrast to the rain-washed silence of the countryside. Felicity felt herself shrinking with every clatter of hooves on cobblestone, every cry of a street vendor. The small townhouse her father had taken for the purpose of this presentation felt cramped and overwatched. The new dress had been purchased after all, a deep blue silk that her father had insisted upon. It felt like a costume, the livery for a new position. She sat in the stiffly formal drawing room, waiting. Mr. Davies, the solicitor, a man made of dust and parchment, had gone to fetch the Duke. Her father paced. Sit down, Felicity. You will wrinkle it. She did not move. When His Grace arrives, you will rise. You will curtsy. You will not speak unless spoken to. You will be demure. He is a duke, Felicity. She knew. She had done nothing but think on it for 3 days. The Duke of Velmore. A cold, reclusive figure, according to the gossip Mr. Davies had nervously supplied. A man who had inherited his title a year ago after the tragic death of his younger brother and heir apparent, Michael. A man who had not been seen in society since. A man who needed a wife for duty, and nothing more. She thought of the man in the mud. Ben. His easy smile, the sadness in his eyes. He had felt real. This Duke, this Velmore, sounded like a phantom, a collection of duties and titles. She clutched the memory of that rainy afternoon to her chest like a talisman. It was her only proof that genuine unscripted moments still existed in the world. The sound of a carriage stopping outside sent a jolt through her. Her father froze, his hand flying to his cravat. He's here. The knocker fell. The housekeeper, hired for the week, scurried to the door. Muffled voices in the hall. Heavy, confident footsteps approaching. His Grace, the Duke of Velmore, the housekeeper announced, her voice trembling with awe. Felicity rose, as instructed. She kept her eyes downcast, her hands clasped before her. She executed the deep, formal curtsy she had been practicing. The silk of her dress whispered against the floor. "Your Grace," her father breathed, bowing low. There was a long silence. Felicity, still in her curtsy, felt the weight of it. It was a silence of appraisal. Cold, dispassionate. "You may rise, Miss Cole," a voice said, and her entire world tilted on its axis. It was his voice, deeper, colder, stripped of any warmth or humor, but unmistakably the same voice that had called her Miss Expert in the mud. Slowly, she raised her head. He stood in the doorway, a colossus of aristocratic perfection. He was immaculate now, dressed in a coat of severe black, superfine wool that fit his broad shoulders to perfection. His cravat was a masterpiece of starched white linen. His dark hair was brushed into disciplined waves. Not a speck of mud was to be seen. But the face was the same. The sharp, angular planes, the firm set of his jaw, and the eyes, the storm-grey eyes. They were looking at her now, but they were glacial, empty of all recognition. It was as if he had never seen her before in his life. The shock was a physical blow. She felt the blood drain from her face. It was him, her stranger, her secret. And he was the Duke, the man who was buying her. He must have recognized her. He must have. But his face was a mask of polite indifference. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "Miss Cole," her father was babbling, gesturing toward a chair. "Your Grace, an honor, a profound honor. May I offer you some refreshment?" "That will not be necessary, Mr. Cole," the Duke said, his voice cutting through her father's sycophantic chatter. His gaze did not leave Felicity. "I trust the arrangements meet with your approval, Miss Cole?" It was a test. She knew it. He was watching her, waiting to see if she would betray their secret. Waiting to see if she was the sort of woman who would claim a prior acquaintance to her advantage. The humiliation was a hot, bitter wave. He was not just ignoring their meeting. He was challenging her to mention it. She drew on every ounce of the composure she had spent a lifetime perfecting. She met his cold gaze with a quiet stillness of her own. "The arrangements are as my father wishes," she said, her voice even. "I am guided by his wisdom in all things." Something flickered in the depths of his grey eyes. It was not warmth, perhaps disappointment. Or was it respect? It was gone as quickly as it came. He nodded again, a sharp, decisive gesture. "Excellent. My solicitor will be in touch with Mr. Davies to finalize the schedule. The wedding will be by special license, as soon as possible." He looked around the small, cramped room with an air of faint distaste. "I will not take up any more of your time." He turned, gave a curt nod to her father, and was gone. The front door closed with a soft, final thud. Her father exhaled, as if he had been holding his breath for a week. "There, it is done," he approved. "Felicity, you were perfect. Perfect." Felicity sank back into her chair, the blue silk of her dress rustling around her like fallen leaves. She felt cold, so very cold. The man in the mud was gone. In his place was the Duke of Velmore, and she was to be his Duchess, a quiet, uncomplicated piece of furniture in his grand, empty life. The transaction was complete, and it was so much worse than she had ever imagined. The wedding was a bloodless affair, conducted in a dusty corner of a London church, with only her father, Mr. Davies, and a grim-faced man who must have been the Duke's solicitor as witnesses. Felicity wore a simple dress of cream-coloured silk. Benjamin, she could not think of him as His Grace when he stood so close, wore the same severe black he seemed to favour. He spoke his vows in a low, clear monotone. his gaze fixed on a point somewhere over the vicar's shoulder. When it was her turn, Felicity's voice was a whisper, but it did not tremble. The moment the vicar pronounced them man and wife, a palpable tension filled the small space. Benjamin turned to her. For a horrifying second, she thought he might try to kiss her, as was custom. Instead, he simply took her gloved hand, his touch brief and cool, and raised it halfway to his lips in a gesture so formal it was an insult. "Duchess," he said, the word a sentence. And that was it. She was the Duchess of Velmore. They travelled to his country seat, Farhurst, in his carriage. It was not the one that had been stuck in the mud. This was a grand, lacquered vehicle, emblazoned with a ducal crest, sprung so perfectly one barely felt the road. They sat opposite one another, the space between them a vast, silent chasm. He did not speak for the first hour. He simply stared out the window, his profile as sharp and unforgiving as a blade. Felicity sat with her hands in her lap, watching the city give way to countryside, her own thoughts a turbulent sea. Why the charade? Why pretend he did not know her? Was he ashamed to have been found in such a state? Or was he ashamed of her, the muddy girl who had directed him with such impertinence? Perhaps he thought she had engineered the meeting, though that was an impossibility. Finally, as if sensing her turmoil, he spoke, his eyes still fixed on the passing landscape. "I believe it is best we have an understanding," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "This is a marriage of duty. For me, it is the continuation of a name. For your father, it is the erasure of his debts. For you, it is a title and a home." He turned his head then, and his grey eyes pinned her to her seat. "I will not be a husband in the conventional sense. My time is my own. I have obligations that require my solitude. You will be mistress of Farhurst. You will have your own wing of the house. You will want for nothing in a material sense. Your duties will be to manage the household and, in due course, to provide an heir. Beyond that, I require only your discretion and your absence." It was the coldest, most brutal speech she had ever heard. It laid her out like a specimen under glass. Discretion and absence. Be invisible. Be quiet. "Do you understand?" he asked. Felicity met his gaze. The man from the mud was well and truly buried. This was a stranger, a hard, polished shell of a man, and she was trapped with him. "I understand, Your Grace," she said, her voice steady. "You have purchased a duchess. I will endeavour to be worth the price." For the first time, a flicker of genuine emotion crossed his face. A muscle jumped in his jaw. He looked for a fleeting moment, as if she had struck him. He opened his mouth to say something, then closed it again. He turned back to the window. They did not speak again for the rest of the journey. Farhurst was magnificent. It was also utterly soulless. It rose from the rolling landscape like a great pale stone mausoleum, perfectly proportioned, architecturally flawless, and radiating a palpable chill. The staff lined up in the entrance hall, a tableau of starched aprons and nervous expressions. At their head was a housekeeper who looked as ancient and unyielding as the house itself. They bowed and curtsied as one. Benjamin walked past them without a word, gesturing for the housekeeper to attend to his new wife. "Her Grace will be in the Sunderland wing," he said, his voice echoing in the cavernous, marble-floored hall. "See to her needs." Then he turned and walked down a long corridor, disappearing through a heavy oak door that closed with a quiet, definitive click. He had not so much as glanced at Felicity. Her own wing. a gilded prison within the larger one. The Sunderland wing was beautiful. The rooms were light and airy, the furniture exquisite, the views of the parkland breathtaking. It was also utterly impersonal. There was not a single book out of place, not a shawl draped over a chair, not a sign that anyone had ever truly lived there. Felicity endured the ministrations of the housekeeper, Mrs. Croft, and a young, terrified housemaid named Anna. She allowed them to unpack her meagre belongings, which looked pathetically out of place in the vast mahogany wardrobes. The first few weeks were a lesson in invisibility. She saw her husband only at dinner. They ate in a dining room that could have seated 60, placed at opposite ends of a gleaming 20-foot stretch of polished mahogany. Conversation was impossible and clearly not desired. He would eat quickly, his eyes on his plate, give a curt nod, and retreat back to his study. The heavy oak door. Felicity began to explore. She learned the geography of her prison. The house was a labyrinth of corridors and silent, dust-sheeted rooms. It felt as though it was holding its breath. The staff spoke in whispers, their movements furtive, their eyes constantly darting toward the west wing, toward the Duke's study. They were afraid of him. She found the library. It was her one sanctuary, a vast 2-story room, lined from floor to ceiling with books. It smelled of leather and paper and beeswax, a scent of life and history in the sterile house. And unlike the other rooms, it felt used. A book lay open on a reading stand. A stack of papers sat on a desk. This was his space. But he was never there when she visited. She would slip in during the day, running her fingers over the spines of books, breathing in the quiet. One afternoon, she found a book of poetry left on a window seat. It was open to a page marked with a dried wildflower. A woman's handwriting was in the margin. Felicity closed it quickly, feeling like an intruder. She learned things from the staff, not by asking, but by listening. She learned that Mrs. Croft had served the family for 50 years, that Anna the maid was saving her wages to help her mother, that the gardener, a taciturn man named Thomas, was worried about the blight on the roses. She started to talk to them, asking after Anna's mother, inquiring about the roses with Thomas. Small things, human things. She requested that a small table be set for dinner in a cozy morning room instead of the cavernous dining hall. Mrs. Croft looked scandalized, but the order was from the Duchess, so it was done. That evening, when Benjamin entered the morning room, he stopped dead in the doorway. The room was lit by candlelight. A fire crackled in the hearth, and a small round table was set for 2. It looked domestic. "What is this?" he asked, his voice sharp. "This is dinner, Your Grace," Felicity replied calmly from her seat. "I find I do not enjoy shouting my observations about the weather down a corridor of mahogany." He stared at her, then at the table. For a moment, she thought he would turn and leave. Instead, with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of the world, he took the seat opposite her. The space between them was now mere feet, not yards. It was terrifying and exhilarating. They ate in silence, but it was a different kind of silence. It was charged, aware. She could hear the sound of his breathing. She noticed the way his long fingers curled around his wine glass. After that night, they always dined in the morning room. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental. She had, in one small way, refused to be absent. From his study, Benjamin watched her. He had a small, strategically placed spy hole, a decorative carving in a panel that could be slid aside. That gave him a view of the main corridor. It was a relic from a more paranoid ancestor, and he had never used it until now. He saw her walking with the gardener, pointing at the rose bushes, her head tilted in serious conversation. He saw her in the library, her face rapt as she read, the afternoon sun turning her dark hair to fire. He saw her stop to speak to Anna, the little housemaid, and saw the girl's terrified expression soften into a genuine smile. She was bringing his house back to life, and it infuriated him. It terrified him. He had built his world on a foundation of grief and control. After Michael's death, bright, laughing, reckless Michael, who had taken a jump his horse couldn't clear while racing Benjamin across the fields, he had sealed himself away. The guilt was a physical thing, a constant weight in his chest. He had challenged his brother to that race. It was his fault. His. He had inherited a title he never wanted, a responsibility he resented. The world had become a series of duties to be performed, and the marriage was the most onerous of all. He needed an heir to secure the line, to ensure Michael's death was not the end of the Velmore name. He had instructed his solicitor to find him a wife. Respectable, quiet, uncomplicated. A woman who would not make demands on his hollowed-out soul. And they had brought him her, the woman from the mud. When he had walked into that London drawing room and seen her, his first instinct had been to turn and flee. She was a ghost from a different life, a life where a man could be caught in the rain and laugh with a stranger, a life that had died with Michael. Seeing her there, packaged and presented for his approval, had felt like a profanation of that one, strangely pure memory. So he had erected a wall of ice. He had pretended not to know her to protect himself. If he acknowledged her, he would have to acknowledge the man he had been for that 1 hour in the rain. A man capable of being helped, of feeling admiration, of smiling. He was not that man anymore. He could not afford to be. He had laid out his cruel terms in the carriage, hoping to scare her into the quiet, invisible role he required. I require only your discretion and your absence. And she had looked him in the eye and said, "You have purchased a duchess. I will endeavour to be worth the price." The words had flayed him. She had seen the transaction for exactly what it was, and had thrown it back in his face with a dignity that shamed him. Now she was here, in his house, quietly dismantling his defences, without even trying. The small dinner table had been a masterstroke. It forced him into her proximity. It made her impossible to ignore. He found himself watching the way the candlelight played in her hair, the intelligence in her quiet, observant eyes. He was losing control. And the most terrifying part was the small, treacherous voice inside him that did not want to regain it. One evening, he found her in the library, asleep in a large wing-back chair by the fire, a book fallen into her lap. Her face in repose was soft and vulnerable. The carefully constructed mask of the Duchess was gone, and for a moment, she was just Felicity. He felt a powerful, protective urge that stunned him with its intensity. He wanted to pull the cashmere throw from the nearby sofa and cover her. He did not. He turned and retreated to his study, the oak door clicking shut behind him like a cell door. He was a coward, and he knew it. The Dowager Duchess of Velmore, Hortense, arrived like a galleon in full sail, unannounced and unexpected. She was a formidable woman in her late 70s, with eyes as sharp as her grandson's, and a tongue reputed to be even sharper. She descended upon Farhurst, her lorgnette held before her like a weapon, and surveyed the scene. Her gaze swept over the brighter, cleaner hall, the fresh flowers in a vase on the console table, Felicity's touch, and the nervous but less terrified staff. She found Felicity in the garden, discussing the new cuttings with Thomas. "So," the dowager said, her voice raspy but powerful. "You're the little mouse my grandson has acquired." Felicity rose and curtsied. "Your Grace," she said, "we were not expecting you." "No one ever is," the old woman said, her sharp eyes taking in Felicity's plain dress and work-smudged hands. "It is how I get the most honest assessments. Benjamin is locked in his cave, I presume?" "The Duke is in his study, yes," Felicity replied, her tone even. He has been in his study for a year. Grieving is one thing. A prolonged sulk is quite another. Michael would have hated it." The dowager's eyes softened for a fraction of a second at the mention of her younger grandson. "And you? What do you make of this mausoleum?" "The house has a great deal of potential," Felicity said carefully. The dowager let out a cackle. "Diplomatic? And you shortened the dining table. I heard about that from my sources." She tapped her ear. "Good. Hated that monstrosity. Always felt like I was shouting at my own husband from across the county." She took Felicity's arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "Walk with me, child. Tell me how a quiet little mouse from Hertfordshire managed to get my granite-headed grandson to change a single thing." Over the next few days, Hortense became Felicity's unlikely ally. She observed everything. She saw the silent dinners in the morning room, the way Benjamin's eyes would follow Felicity when he thought no one was looking, the way Felicity never pushed, never demanded, but simply was. "He's a fool," Hortense announced one afternoon as she and Felicity sat taking tea. Like his grandfather, all duty and honor on the outside, a raging sea of sentiment on the inside, and just as dense. He thinks he's protecting himself from you. He doesn't realize he's starving himself to death. She leaned forward. He was not always like this. Before Michael, he laughed. "Can you imagine that, child?" My grandson laughed. Felicity looked down at her teacup. "I can," she whispered, so softly the dowager almost didn't hear. "Oh?" Hortense's eyes narrowed. "Interesting." That evening, the dowager insisted on joining them for dinner. Her presence shattered the fragile, silent truce Felicity and Benjamin had established. Hortense kept up a running commentary, asking pointed questions of them both. "Benjamin, your new duchess has a mind. Have you noticed? Or have you been too busy communing with ghosts?" "Grandmother," he warned, his voice tight. "Felicity, my dear, do you ride? Benjamin has the finest stable in the county, and he rides alone, like a madman. You should join him. It might do you both good." "The Duchess may ride if she wishes," Benjamin said stiffly. "The stable is at her disposal." "I am not an accomplished horsewoman, I'm afraid," Felicity said quietly, though she could ride perfectly well. It felt like a boundary she was not yet ready to cross. Later, after dinner, Hortense found Benjamin in the library. "She's a good girl," the dowager said, without preamble. "Solid, kind, and she's not afraid of you. That's the most important part." "I am aware of my wife's qualities, grandmother," he said, not looking up from the estate ledger he was pretending to read. "Are you?" She shot back. "Because from where I am sitting, It looks as though you are determined to ignore them. You bought yourself a wife to do your duty, but you ended up with a woman of substance. The universe has played a magnificent joke on you, you stubborn boy. The question is, are you going to be clever enough to see the punchline? She left him there, the scent of her lavender water lingering in the air, her words hanging in the silence like a judgment. The east wing had been Michael's. Felicity knew this from a hushed comment Anna had made. It was kept locked. No one went there. It was the heart of the house's grief, the source of the chill that even the new flowers and open curtains could not quite dispel. One rainy afternoon, walking the upper corridors, Felicity found the door ajar. A cleaning maid must have left it unlocked by accident. A sliver of grey light cut across the dusty floorboards. Curiosity, and something deeper, a desire to understand the man she was married to, pulled her forward. She pushed the door open. The air inside was stale, cold. The rooms were just as Michael had left them. Riding boots kicked into a corner, a book open face down on a bedside table, a half-finished letter on a writing desk. The ink faded. It was a shrine, a perfectly preserved moment of a life cut short. She did not go in. She stood on the threshold, her hand on the doorframe, a profound sadness washing over her. Not for herself, but for the two brothers. One gone, one trapped. This was the wound. This was the source of all the pain that radiated through the house, through her husband. It must be very difficult, she said, her voice a soft breath in the silence. She did not realize she had spoken aloud until she heard the sharp intake of breath behind her. She turned. Benjamin stood there, his face a mask of thunder. He had come up the corridor silently. His eyes were blazing with a cold fire she had not seen since that first meeting in London. "What are you doing here?" he bit out, his voice dangerously low. She expected him to rage, to accuse her of prying, of violating his brother's memory. She braced herself for the onslaught, but she did not flinch. She did not apologize. She simply met his furious gaze and held it. "The door was open," she said. "I was just looking." She turned back to the room. He must have been very loved. Her response completely disarmed him. The anger in his eyes faltered, replaced by a raw, naked pain that was terrible to behold. He had expected an argument, a defense. He had no defense against her quiet empathy. "This is a private place," he said, but the heat was gone from his voice. It was just weary. "I know," she said, turning back to him. "And you have carried it alone for too long." He stared at her, his chest rising and falling. He looked from her face to the open door of Michael's room, and something inside him seemed to break. The iron control he had maintained for a year finally fractured. "It was my fault," he whispered, the words torn from him. "I challenged him to the race. The ground was wet. I told him to slow down, but he just laughed. He was always the better rider, always braver." He looked at his hands, as if seeing the reins of his brother's horse in them. "I watched him fall." Felicity's heart ached for him. She took a hesitant step closer. "It was an accident, Benjamin." It was the first time she had used his given name. It hung in the air between them, a fragile bridge across a vast canyon. His head snapped up. He looked at her, truly looked at her, perhaps for the first time since the rain-soaked road. He saw not the Duchess, not the woman his solicitor had found, but the woman who had knelt in the mud to help a stranger, the woman who now stood before him, offering not judgment, not pity, but simple, unadorned understanding. He did not reply. He couldn't. He simply turned and walked away, leaving her standing alone in the corridor, the silence of the east wing behind her, and the sound of his name, her offering, echoing in the space between them. But something had changed. A door had been opened, and not just the one to his brother's rooms. The thaw was slow, almost imperceptible at first. It began with small conversations. He would join her for a cup of tea in the library after dinner, instead of retreating immediately to his study. He asked her about the books she was reading. She, in turn, asked about the estate, about the tenants, about the business that consumed his days. She learned he was a meticulous, responsible landlord, far more concerned with the welfare of his people than his cold exterior would suggest. He learned she had a sharp, practical mind, an intuitive understanding of the land that came from a childhood spent roaming its fields. He started to talk about Michael, not about his death, but about his life, stories from their boyhood, filled with mischief and laughter. As he spoke, Felicity saw glimpses of the man he had been, the man who could laugh, the man his grandmother had described. He was excavating his own past, and she was his quiet, patient witness. One crisp autumn morning, he found her in the hall, pulling on her cloak. "I am walking to the home farm," she said, before he could ask. "Mrs. Croft tells me the steward's wife has a new baby." "It is a 3-mile walk," he said. "I enjoy walking." He hesitated. "I will have the carriage brought around." "There is no need, Your Grace. Benjamin," he cut in, his voice rough. "My name is Benjamin." He looked away, toward the stables. "I will ride with you." They walked to the stables together in silence. He saddled 2 horses himself, a gentle mare for her, and his own powerful black stallion. He helped her mount, his hands lingering for a fraction of a second at her waist. The touch was electric. They rode out across the park, the autumn leaves crunching under the horses' hooves. The silence between them was no longer empty, but full of unspoken things. He pointed out landmarks, telling her their history. She listened, absorbing the stories, weaving them into her growing understanding of him and his home. Her home. The change in their master and new mistress did not go unnoticed by the staff. The whispers in the corridors were different now. They were not fearful, but curious, hopeful. Mrs. Croft was seen to smile, a rare event. Anna hummed as she worked. Farhurst was slowly, tentatively, beginning to breathe again. The fragile peace was shattered by the arrival of a letter bearing her father's seal. Felicity's heart sank as she read it. He was coming to Farhurst. He wrote of wanting to see how his dear daughter was faring. But she knew the truth. His first payment from the Duke's fortune would be spent. He was coming for more. She found Benjamin in the study, the heavy oak door now often left ajar. She handed him the letter without a word. He read it, his expression hardening. "You do not have to see him," he said. "He is my father," she replied, the words tasting like ash. The old chains of duty were heavy. "He sold you, Felicity." The words were quiet, but brutal in their honesty. "I know," she said, looking down at her hands. "But he is still my father." Benjamin stood up and came around the desk. He stood before her, closer than he had ever stood before. He reached out, as if to touch her face, then let his hand fall. "Then we will face him together." Mr. Cole arrived in a hired chaise, looking more prosperous than Felicity had ever seen him. He wore a new coat of gaudy, fashionable cut, and a self-satisfied air that set Felicity's teeth on edge. He greeted her with a theatrical embrace, calling her Duchess, in a tone that was both proud and proprietary. He treated Benjamin with a ghastly, sycophantic familiarity, as if they were partners in a successful business venture. Benjamin was a block of ice. He was polite, correct, and utterly remote. He treated Mr. Cole like a tradesman he was forced to entertain. The confrontation came after dinner. Benjamin had excused himself, pleading estate business, leaving Felicity alone with her father in the library. The dowager had conveniently retired with a headache, though she gave Felicity a look that was pure steel and whispered, "Give him no quarter, child." "Well," her father said, rubbing his hands together as he surveyed the magnificent room. "You have done well for yourself, my girl. Very well indeed." "I have done as you required," Felicity said, her voice cool. He seemed not to notice her tone. "Yes, yes. And now, well, an opportunity has arisen. A wonderful investment in the shipping trade. But it requires capital. A small amount for a man like Velmore." "No," Felicity said. Her father blinked. "No? What do you mean, no? It is a trifle for him, and it is your duty, as a daughter, to see to your father's prosperity." "My duty," she repeated, the words flat and dead. "My duty was to marry him to save your name. I have done my duty. The contract is fulfilled." His face darkened. The jovial mask fell away, revealing the desperate, grasping man beneath. "Do not take that tone with me, Felicity. You are a duchess because of me. You live in this palace, wear these fine clothes, because I had the foresight to arrange it. Do not forget your place." "I know my place very well," she said, her voice rising, infused with a strength she didn't know she possessed. "I am the Duchess of Velmore, and this is my house, and you will not speak to me in that manner within it." "Insolent girl," he roared, his face purpling. "After all I have done for you, you are an asset, and you will do as I say. You will go to your duke, and you will get me that money." "That will not be necessary." The voice came from the doorway. Benjamin stood there, his frame filling the entrance. He was no longer the remote duke. He was a figure of quiet, controlled fury. He had overheard everything. He walked slowly into the room, not to her father, but to Felicity. He came to stand beside her, his shoulder almost touching hers. A united front. He did not look at her, but she could feel the heat and strength of him. A living shield. Only then did he turn his gaze upon Mr. Cole. The temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees. "Mr. Cole," Benjamin said, his voice soft, almost conversational, which made it all the more terrifying. "Let us have a final accounting. I agreed to settle your debts in their entirety in exchange for your daughter's hand in marriage. I have done so. My man of business informs me that the sum was considerable." Mr. Cole visibly shrank. "I have provided your daughter with a home, a title, and my name," Benjamin continued, his voice like chips of ice. "I believe I have more than fulfilled my side of the bargain. You, on the other hand, have come into my home, insulted my wife, and attempted to treat her as a chattel to be leveraged for your own gain. You have not behaved as a gentleman. You have not, I think, ever behaved as a father." He took a step forward. "You will not receive another penny from me. Not now, not ever. Furthermore, your access to this house and to your daughter is no longer your right. It is a privilege to be granted or withheld at the Duchess's discretion. He looked at Felicity, and at mine. Her father stared, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. He looked from the Duke's implacable face to his daughter's resolute one. He saw no weakness, no opening. He was defeated. The bluster drained out of him, leaving a small, shabby, frightened man. He seemed to shrink inside his fine new coat. It was a pathetic sight. "Get out," Benjamin said, his voice flat. "A carriage will be waiting to take you to the nearest coaching inn. Do not return." Mr. Cole stumbled out of the room without another word. The great oak door of the library swung shut behind him, and the silence he left was profound. Felicity stood, trembling. The adrenaline, the anger, the years of resentment and pain all came crashing down on her. A single tear escaped and traced a path down her cheek. Benjamin turned to her. He gently, so gently, reached up and brushed the tear away with his thumb. His touch was warm. "He's gone," he said softly. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice choked. He looked at her, his storm-grey eyes filled with 1,000 emotions she was only just beginning to learn how to read. Regret, apology, and a deep, aching tenderness. "Your father," he said, his voice rough with feeling, sold a treasure he did not recognize. He took a deep breath. "Felicity, I am the one who should be thanking you. You came into this house, a house of grief and silence, and you have filled it with light. You have been patient with a man who did not deserve your patience. I was wrong. The terms of our marriage, they were cruel. I was cruel. I was drowning, and I was determined to let no one near me." He took her hands in his. They were strong and warm. "Can you ever forgive me?" "There is nothing to forgive," she whispered, looking up at him. "Felicity?" He said her name as if it were a prayer. "I." He stopped, searching for the words. "The day we met, in the mud, I thought you were the most extraordinary woman I had ever seen. I was afraid of that, afraid of what you might make me feel. I have been a fool." "And I," she said, a small, watery smile touching her lips, "thought you were just a very stubborn man named Ben." A ghost of his old smile, the one from the rainy track, touched his lips. "I'm still that man, I think." "Good," she said. And then, feeling bolder than she had ever felt in her life, she rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his. It was a tentative kiss at first, a question. He responded instantly, his arms coming around her, pulling her close, deepening the kiss into an answer. It was a kiss of homecoming, of promises remade, of a future beginning. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathless. He rested his forehead against hers. "Is it too late?" he whispered against her lips. "To begin this marriage again?" She looked up into his eyes, the grey now warm and clear as a summer sky after a storm. "Benjamin," she said, her voice full of all the love she had held in silence for so long. "It is just the beginning." Epilogue. 1 year later, the gardens at Farhurst were in full riotous bloom. The roses, under the combined care of Thomas the gardener and the Duchess herself, were a triumph of crimson and gold. The house, once a silent mausoleum, was now filled with light and laughter. The dust sheets were gone, the rooms aired and used. The sound of a pianoforte could often be heard drifting from an open window. Felicity, Duchess of Velmore, stood on the great lawn, directing 2 gardeners who were moving a large stone urn. "A little to the left," she called out, shielding her eyes from the afternoon sun with her hand. A pair of strong arms wrapped around her waist from behind. A familiar chin rested on her shoulder. "Issuing orders to your troops, Duchess?" Benjamin murmured in her ear. She leaned back against him, a contented smile on her face. "Merely restoring a little balance to the world, Your Grace." He chuckled, the sound warm and easy. "You have certainly restored it to mine." He turned her in his arms and looked at her, his love for her a clear, steady light in his eyes. "Do you remember this day, a year ago?" "My father's visit," she said softly. "I remember it. It was the day I finally saw sense," he said. "The day I realized I had been given a gift I was too blind and stubborn to accept." He tucked a stray curl behind her ear. "Though I still maintain my favorite memory of you is from before that." "Oh?" she asked, her eyes sparkling. "The day I shortened the dining table?" "No," he said, a roguish glint in his eye. "The day I met a magical creature, an expert in the properties of mud, who appeared from the rain and saved a wretch like me." She laughed, the sound bright and free. "You were hardly a wretch, just very muddy, and very cross." "I was lost," he corrected her gently. "And you, my love, my Felicity, you showed me the way home." He bent his head and kissed her, a long, sweet kiss in the summer sunshine, with the scent of roses all around them. Farhurst stood behind them, no longer a prison or a mausoleum, but a home, built not on a transaction, but on the enduring, transformative power of a quiet, unexpected love. Thank you for listening to the story all the way to the end. Please tell us which city you're watching from, and what the story made you feel. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss new stories.